Every few months, I get the bright idea to go to the library. It always seems like such a great place to get down to the business of the day, a setting that bleeds productivity and focus. Yet every time I go, something tells me I'm not doing it right. First of all, I never really truly feel welcome when I'm at the library. It seems like everyone is looking at me like that guy who only goes to church twice a year. The outsider, the interloper who figures if he pays an occasional visit to tap the font of wisdom, he too will be a wise man. I think I might have just coined that last sentence, so please don't use it without attribution. It's as if the regulars and local librarists, I think I made up that word, have a mental image of all who come through the doors. And when someone from the outside the family enters, they are watched closely. Last time I paid a visit, I could feel it, like the cold north wind raking my face on a November day. They watched me from the checkout desk as I entered the building. They glared at me as I passed them on the stairs on my way to the adult section of the library, which I must tell you is much different than the adult section of a bookstore. They peeked from behind the stacks, their gaze cutting through me with the force of 10,000 lasers. And when I approached the desk where one receives the internet password du jour, I was greeted by a stare from eyes as black and dead as the great white. All right, so it wasn't that bad, but it was fun painting the picture, and truthfully, it wasn't the most inviting place for me. But I really, really wanted to be there, to soak it in, to feel the literary endorphins kicking in, to experience my mind opening, and to let the wisdom invade every pore of my body. I wanted to be inspired. I wanted the library high. The setup went smoothly. Fire up the laptop, check. Arrange notes on the desk, check. Earbuds in, check. So far, so good. Now, before diving into my work, I decided to make a visit to the restroom. I went in without incident, but as I emerged, I noticed someone sitting at one of the library computers looking at me as if to say, "What do you think you're doing? Do you have permission to be here? In our facility?" His stare was so piercing, I actually looked back to make sure I hadn't accidentally used the women's room. I hadn't. And then I discreetly checked to make sure my zipper was in the up position. It was. Now, in the end, I just chalked it up to the fact that I was the outsider and went back to my desk, ready to get to work. After about 15 minutes, I grew restless, so I got up to find a book. As I rose, I knocked over my chair. A minor incident, an innocent mistake, to be sure, in most places. But at the library, an offense like this is cause for quick and severe reaction by all those in proximity, Because if you haven't already surmised, the library is a sanctuary, a place of peace, respect, and silence, where movements should be slow and calculated, where all patrons proceed with utmost caution and reverence. That statement alone should have been my signal to stay away, because I exhibit few of those traits, and rarely more than one at a time. Early on, I knew I was fighting a losing battle. Nonetheless, I soldiered on, picking up the chair to the scorn of 10, 15, maybe 20 onlookers, including the restroom guy, a jury of my peers that had me convicted and sentenced long before all the evidence had been presented. We'll return to this later. So what does story mean to me? Well, it's interesting. I'm gonna talk about what happened immediately before lunch, and I was in Roger's breakout session. Beautiful, by the way. Thank you, and you will all enjoy it, and I'm not going to have any spoiler alerts for you. But we talked a little bit about stories. He was talking about stories in one way, and I believe that I need to, after listening to him, recraft it and talk about personal narratives. Narrative, the personal narrative, which is what I'm sharing with you right now, and that was from my first book called A Year in Words, means everything to me, because instead of using a story or a narrative to escape, I use it to lean into where I've been, what I believe, and maybe where I'm going. And when I help others with their narratives, I try to listen and help craft a narrative or a message or an account that they are not only happy with, but they believe they can own and want to own. As I mentioned, that essay, which we'll return to, is from a book called A Year in Words. And it's called A Year in Words because you heard my bio. I arrived at telling my own stories late. As a creative, I spent a lot of years starting novels, writing poetry, coming up with song lyrics, starting a screenplay, collaborating with others on all kinds of things that never got finished, some that barely got started. And I would talk about these occasionally. Oh, I've got to do this. Oh, I really want to do this. So I'm going to take you to 2014, July 2014. Joni and I, my wife Joni, sitting here today. Raise your hand, Joni. You need credit. We're sitting on the deck having a glass of wine, and I was having one of my semi-yearly commiserations about, oh God, I just want to do a project on my own. I'm sick of working with just doing client work. Joni, God love her, it was perfect timing and perfect, everything was perfect. I started complaining about myself and about this, and Joan said, here's the deal. You're either going to do something or you're not, but we're not going to talk about it again. So over the next 20 minutes, we started coming up with some ideas. And what we decided was, what can I do? I can write. And I had at that time 40 plus years of life behind me, and memories and stories and funny things and other things. And I thought, you know what, I can write. And I can write personal accounts that primarily hopefully will entertain, but maybe will inspire or influence other people. Maybe help some people create change. I don't know. So I wanted to come up with some rules. So I decided I was going to write an essay a day for 365 days. I decided that it had to be of a certain length because I didn't want to just write 2 paragraphs. That's just journaling, right? I wanted to write a story. I wanted to write an account, a full-baked beginning, middle, end. So at first I thought, 100 words a day. I'm not a good enough writer to say what I have to say in 100 words. And then I thought, what's the next logical? 365 days, 365 words for 365 days. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so I thought, okay, great, so what are we gonna call it? 365 for 365? Sounds like an ESPN show, can't do that. So we came up with some other things, and finally I landed on, okay, how about this? A year in words, as I got up to go get another glass of wine. 5 minutes later, I walk here. Joan with her iPad goes, all right, I registered that domain. When are you going to start? Again. My response, next week. So on July 8th, 2014, I started my 365-day trek through what became A Year in Words. My essays, and the other 2 rules I had were that I was not going to think about the day's essay until I got up in the morning, and I was simply going to sit down and write what was on my mind, which I will tell you is not too hard for about 40 days, but then you start running out of memories and opinions and thoughts, but we can get back to that later. So that was another rule, and the final rule was I was going to post it by 7 a.m. every day for whomever wanted to read it, which was at the time about 6 people. But nonetheless, I wanted to set that out. I wanted to get it out of my day and get going, right? Because I had other things to do. I had to make money. This wasn't making any money, right? So we set out. And so a year and about 500,000 words later, because most of my essays ended up between 1,000 and 2,000 words, I had all these essays. So that's when I really grew a true appreciation of my personal narrative, because I was sharing it. It was the funny stories about Cub Scouts and the 4 hilarious near drownings I have, which I know doesn't sound funny, but they are. They're funny, and they're true. The 3 times I've fallen off a treadmill in my life. I mean, these kinds of things. So those are the easy ones. That's low-hanging fruit, man. That's a fastball down the middle. But then there's also ones about the day we stood outside the day we buried my father in 15 below weather, and the military buglist could barely make a note to play taps because it was so cold. So I had all these essays, and it took another 5 years before I had the book, That Is a Year in Words, which I self-published. And realized that this, I don't like to call this a passion project, but I did this because I wanted to do it, not because I wanted it to be on the New York Times bestseller list. But if anybody has any contacts, I'm open. So I did it for two reasons. One, because I wanted a book on the shelf. But two, because my mom, who at the time was 83 years old, I wanted to put a book in her hands. So this is the second copy I pulled out of the first box that I got in late July of 2019. The first one went to her. And every time I read from this book, and I have a couple books, I read from this one because this one's special to me, because it's beat up and it's dog-eared, and this is the one. I don't believe in good luck charms, but if there was one, this would be mine. So that's how I arrived at truly valuing my personal narrative, and it really helped me bring out, usually in kind of a self-deprecating way, my authenticity. It helped me lean into who I am. It helped me, I was never really uncomfortable with being vulnerable, but it helped me really explore my vulnerability and realize the power that people have. And if you are a man, maybe you don't understand it. If you're a woman, you're going, why do you care about vulnerability? Everybody should be vulnerable, but guys don't. Guys in my generation, I'm pretty old, don't always get into vulnerability. And I think it's a massive power that we all have because it makes us relatable. And I think as leaders, we need to be, and if we're going to bring about the next generation of leaders, whether it's in our families, our communities, and our companies, we need to be relatable because that makes them want to be with us, and that makes them want to work with us, and then that's going to make them more comfortable being who they are and sharing their narratives for the generation after them. You know, we talk about humanity, and we've heard so many good things already in the time we've been together. But to me, that's what personal narrative means. It's having that confidence and that willingness to share the stuff. And it's not always the successes, right? You tell me you got a hole in one? Okay, that's a boring 2-sentence story, right? Okay, I pulled it out, I was hitting a 5-iron, it was 172 yards, downhill, there's bunker on the right, pin was cut in the front, I hit a beautiful shot, bounced twice, rolled in. You've lost me by the second sentence. I had a hole in one that came back out of the hole. Now that's a story. That's a story, and I tell that story to people, and they're like, oh my God, what a bummer you didn't have a hole in one. I said, I'd much rather have the story I have. You know, because it's the almost wins. It's the near misses. It's the, how old were you the first time you fell off a moving pickup truck? I was 13. It's that kind of stuff. Those are the things that make people want, that I believe attract people to us, is those stories. Because maybe you don't have the same story, but I tell you a Cub Scout story, maybe you have a Girl Scout story, or maybe you have whatever story that's like, oh my God, that's just so, that happened. I know, they can see it. So that's what that project did for me, and what I wanted to do is share that with others in whatever capacity it worked. And I've been able to do that, not with millions yet, but with anybody who is either captive, thank you, or who asks me, or who reads my books. So let's go back to that library story. Let's finish that bad boy off. I think it gets better. So I proceeded to the stacks and found, thanks to Mr. Dewey and his decimal system, the correct row and shelf of a book I needed. As I crouched to find its exact location, I felt a familiar sensation, leg cramps. Now let me give you some background to set the scene. I like to exercise in the morning, and when I do, I sweat profusely. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, Dave, you aren't so special. I sweat a lot too. Let's not make more of this than it is. But I'll submit to you that you have no idea how much I sweat because frankly, there's no way to understand the volume of fluid that comes off me during exercise unless you've witnessed it firsthand. At any rate, though I'm aware of the issue, there are days when I don't properly rehydrate after a run or a bike ride. And then added to the fact that I usually hammer down about 4 or 5 cups of coffee within an hour after my workout, it often leads to some pretty severe cramping. Anyway, let's return to the story, which left me stooping and cramping in the library stacks. As I slowly crumbled to the floor, trying to find a position that would ease the gripping, disfiguring cramp in my left hamstring, I was greeted by 2 additional visitors, a cramp in my right leg and a small woman in her mid-70s who innocently came around the corner only to find a man writhing in pain, as quietly and respectfully as possible, mind you, we're in the library, lying much like a rag doll abandoned on the street by a little girl who had just heard the ice cream truck in the distance. Totally debilitated, I could only raise my head enough to see her super sensible shoes broaching. But I knew what was coming next. "Oh my God, are you all right?" She whisper screamed. Her reaction didn't faze me. I've had plenty of people come up to try to come to my rescue during my cramping episodes. But as my family knows, I don't like anyone talking to me when I'm having this experience. It's like I need every fiber of my mind and body to power through it, and any interruption could mean the difference between a full recovery or succumbing to a slow, painful death. I can only imagine it's similar to what a grape goes through as it becomes a raisin. I didn't know that was a laugh line. Wow, okay, thank you. I did everything I could to remain polite through intense pain and clenched teeth. "Yes, I'm fine, cramp," I shout whispered. The words were short, staccato, and labored. She walked away, apparently satisfied that I didn't need or want her assistance. It was, without a doubt, the best decision she'd make all day. In reality, she probably didn't want to be seen fraternizing with or assisting a non-librarianist. No matter, she was gone. So after a few moments, I worked out the cramps, got to my feet, gathered myself, and decided maybe I'm just not cut out for this library thing. Maybe it was karma. Maybe there were forces at play telling me I'm not wanted there. Gremlins that knock over chairs, people with deep, dead eyes that send telepathic messages to stay away, and librarians with voodoo dolls that have the power to bring me to my knees in the stacks. Overall, I like the library. It feels so smart, with all the volumes and the reference section and the smells and the individual study carrels and small meeting rooms where people quietly pore over topics way too important and intelligent to discuss in the general population, where I was sitting. And cramping and knocking things over. After all that, I returned to my seat, defeated but ready, finally, to reform, to give it one more try and to respect the power of this place. I opened the book I had found and began to read. This is the stuff of dreams, I thought. I had paid my dues, and now I would reap the rewards. Then my phone rang, and the panic and silent ridicule started all over again. So I decided to simply pack up and leave. It was best for all of us. Could have sworn I put that thing on vibrate. So why do I tell you that story? Because that story, frankly, in a nutshell, while not my best one, is possibly puts into a package who I am. I'm self-deprecating. I cramp a lot. I'm clumsy. I like to make fun of myself. I'm observant, and I'm curious, and I think. I talk to a lot of people who go, they start something with, "I'm not a writer, but," and I stop them because I believe that everyone is a writer. You don't need qualifications to be a writer. You don't even really need tools to be a writer. If you're curious, you can be a writer. And I believe that curiosity is the greatest gift that I've been given in my life because it has made me a better listener. It has made me more engaging and relatable to people. And it makes me a much better writer and communicator. And I think that's the other thing we as leaders need to be, not only about ourselves and our jobs and our companies and profits, but about our people. We need to be curious about our people and who they are, not what they are or what they do. And we need to listen more. And then we need to relate, not in a boastful, one-upsman way, but to relate to them. They tell a story and you can identify with them because that makes you more relatable. And I believe it makes us all better leaders. We're all good at what we do. We all know how to lead on some level. But I think if we take it a little bit farther, listen a little bit more, be a little bit more curious, I think that's what's going to help us become transformational leaders. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm just the guy in front of you today who's saying it. There's millions of people out there who are better writers than me. There's people out there that are better speakers than me. There's tons and tons of ways to do this. But I'm here now, and you're sitting there, and the door's closed. So for nothing else, we've been here for a while. So that's my message and I also believe I'm kind of a palate cleanser because everybody else is, frankly, talking about some really cool stuff. I'm just up here to entertain and listen to myself talk, which let's face it. But my ask to you is, if you're not already doing it, open yourself up, be a little bit more curious, ask more questions. I think it helps us all, and I think it makes us more identifiable. And I think it makes people, it attracts people to us. And after all that, it's not about having power over people, it's attracting the right people and attracting people to us. So the first essay I read was a personal account. As Rob said, I'm a conversational interviewer, so I do a lot of interviews with CEOs, everybody, all kinds of executives, and but people at all levels, okay? And mostly for videos, but I've interviewed a lot of people. So I help other people tell their stories. And the second one, this last thing I want to leave you with, if you'll indulge me, is a piece I wrote based on a gentleman that I ran into. And of course I lost it. Stand by. And I think this will illustrate, I'm stalling, what I'm talking about. Yeah, these are all good ones, though. Okay. This is titled July 25th, 7:42 a.m. You're left-handed. I noticed him before he said a word. I was in Rockford, Illinois, and had arrived early for a one-day project. That's my MO. I'm almost always early for things. I was waiting for my crew to arrive for a video shoot. We were shooting a TV commercial at a 2-year technical college, and our first shot was outdoors. It was a perfect morning, warm with a light breeze, not a cloud in the sky. I sat on a bench working through the day's schedule as I waited. I saw him in the distance, riding a recumbent bike, the kind that looks like you're riding a 2-wheel recliner. But this bike had 3 wheels. He stopped right in front of me. I was scribbling some notes, and that's when he said it. You're left-handed. It means you're creative. I used to be left-handed. He spoke slowly, and I noticed a slur in his voice. Both his comment and speech pattern were noteworthy. I was inclined to ask him a question, but instead I waited. I had a feeling he wanted to do the talking. I was right, and he didn't waste any time cutting to the chase. Before the first stroke, I was left-handed, but it paralyzed my left side, and now I can barely do anything on that side. That's what strokes do. They mess with your brain, and you can't do hardly anything you could do before. To say a stroke messes with your brain is an understatement. A neurosurgeon once told me the best way to describe it is that it's like a heart attack, only it's in the brain and harder to treat. I couldn't tell how old he was, but I had him pegged at around 60, certainly too young to have a stroke in my book. He asked what brought me to this place. He thought it was cool that we made TV commercials. Then he continued, slowly, in broken sentences, each word and phrase a struggle. Yet everything he said hit me like a ton of bricks. I wouldn't recommend having a stroke, he said, continuing his pattern of understatements. His first one, at age 48, he's had 2, I learned, was caused by high blood pressure, which he attributed to his lifestyle at the time. So when he asked me about my blood pressure, I knew he was still kicking himself because he believed his first stroke was preventable. And he was subtly telling me to take care of myself so this kind of thing didn't happen to me. I gathered he'd had this conversation many times with many people. "It's low," I said, and he gave me a feeble but sincere thumbs up. He went on to tell me how the stroke had taken much of his strength and coordination, but the worst part, he said, was his memory. "I have severe short-term memory loss, and it really gets to me," he said. He told me about his wife, his 3 daughters, and his grandchildren. I listened because that's what he wanted, what he needed. Someone to listen to, someone to listen, not to encourage him or pump him up or give him patronizing compliments. He just wanted somebody to listen. He spoke about pain, frustration, depression. He considered suicide at one point, just to take it all away and to relieve his family of what he called their burden. Then I realized I'd cause more problems for my family if I killed myself, so I decided I needed to keep going and just do the best I can for them. I kept listening, trying to process how this man's life had been completely turned upside down in an instant. Then I thought about how we had come upon one another. What were the chances that I'd be the one person who'd be there at that moment to hear him, to listen to him, and to benefit from his words? He was speaking volumes, thinking out loud, getting things off his chest. He seemed grateful that I had taken the time to talk to him, but I was the lucky one. Because I was learning things from him that no professor or self-help book or mentor could teach me. People always say, "You're doing great," but they don't know what this is like. I don't feel like I'm doing great. I'm just trying to hang on and keep going. He was bearing his soul to me, a stranger. I felt like I needed to formalize things, so I said, "I'm David." His name was Lawrence, and immediately apologized if he forgot my name during the conversation. By now, the crew had shown up and started unloading the gear. At first, Lawrence was unaware of their arrival. The producer waved to me, and I discreetly acknowledged, but wasn't ready to end the conversation. "Yeah, I just keep going, and I know I'm not doing great, but they tell me I can't, they tell me I can't talk very well. I can't see much. I forget things, and I can really only use one side of my body. But for all that, this man was riding a bike. Something he told me he did every day just to help keep himself active and alive," his words. A noise caused Lawrence to look behind him. "Looks like your crew's here," he said. What he didn't know is that they had been there for 10 minutes, just waiting, like they knew exactly what was going on, respecting the moment. A few more minutes passed, and it was time to part. I shook his hand. I thought he'd appreciate that. "Good luck and take care of yourself," I said, looking him straight in the eye. He had a surprisingly firm grip. "I'll do my best," he said, and he rode away. Then, as I walked toward my crew, I heard him say, "It was nice talking to you. I wish I could have spent the whole day with him. Thank you."